I've been meaning to do this one for a long time. Avatar, The Last Airbender. It's turned into a proper comfort watch for me. The sort of thing I put on when I want the world to feel a bit softer. And tonight I thought I'd sit and think out loud about the people in it. Here's the part I keep turning over. Underneath the martial arts and the flying bison and that gloriously chaotic lemur, the show keeps asking genuinely hard questions and then handing each character a different answer to them. What power is actually for when mercy stops being wise? Whether the life you're born into is a sentence or only a starting point. So I'll go through them one at a time, unhurried, following whoever I land on, wherever they take me. A bit of history, a bit of my own opinion, the odd detail I've never quite gotten over. Nothing here is building to anything, so drifting off partway won't cost you a thing. And if you like this sort of video, a subscribe genuinely helps and takes about 2 seconds. Anyway, let's begin where the story itself does, with Aang. Here's the bind Aang is in, and I think it's worth starting with, because everything else in the show sort of orbits it. He's the last of the air nomads, a people who believed right down in their bones that all life is sacred. You don't take a life, not even a bad one, not even to win. And he is also the one person in the entire world capable of ending a 100-year war, which when you get down to the sharp end of it, is probably going to involve killing a man. That's the whole problem with Aang, really. He's a pacifist who's been handed the one job on the planet that seems to require him not to be. The air nomads, the people who raised him, were monks, peaceful, playful, deeply spiritual. Airbending itself tells you a lot about how they thought. It's not a bludgeoning element. Aang doesn't punch through things. He redirects. He sends energy around himself, spins it away, lets the force of an attack carry past him instead of meeting it head-on. His fighting style is basically avoidance turned into an art form, which is a lovely thing to build a superhero around when you think about it. Most heroes hit harder. This one's designed to not be where the hit lands, and then the Fire Nation wiped his people out. All of them. A genocide carried out while he was frozen in a block of ice for 100 years, still biologically 12 when he thawed. So he wakes up into a world at war, the sole survivor of a pacifist culture, and he's told the survival of everyone now rests on him learning 3 more elements and confronting the man running the whole machine. You can see why the kid struggles. What I find genuinely moving about Aang is that he doesn't harden. A lot of stories would take a character like this, load him up with that much loss, and slowly turn him into a grim little soldier. Avatar mostly refuses to do that. He stays goofy. He rides giant koi fish for fun. He gets excited about a market. The grief is in there, and the show does not pretend otherwise, but it never sands off the kid underneath. And I think that's a deliberate argument the writers are making. Losing everything doesn't have to mean becoming hard. You can carry it and still be soft. That's a choice too. There's a whole stretch of the show about the Avatar state, which is the power boost he gets when he taps into all his past lives at once. Enormous power. And also a problem because to fully control it, he's told he has to let go of his earthly attachments. Specifically, at one point, he's asked to let go of Katara, and he won't. He flat out refuses to trade the person he loves for cosmic power, and in refusing, he locks himself out of the state. We'll come back to that when we get to the guru who taught it to him, because it's a lovely little knot of a scene. But the short version is that Aang's greatest weakness and his most human quality are the exact same thing. He loves people too much to become the weapon the world wants him to be. Which brings us to the ending, and the bit that people still argue about to this day. Aang doesn't want to kill the Fire Lord. Every past avatar he consults basically tells him to get on with it, and instead of accepting that, he goes off on his own, ends up on the back of an ancient lion turtle, and learns a technique older than the avatar itself, energy bending. the power to reach into a person and take their bending away without taking their life. So when the final fight comes, Aang doesn't kill Ozai, he unmakes him, strips his fire out of him, and leaves him a very ordinary, very powerless man. Now, I love this ending, and I also completely understand the people who don't. The criticism, and it's a fair one, is that it's a bit of a get-out. Aang gets to keep his principles intact, but only because the universe handed him a magic third option at the last possible second. He didn't really solve the dilemma so much as get rescued from it by a convenient turtle. And there's a version of that reading where the whole moral weight of the show sort of deflates right at the finish line. I don't fully land there myself, but I think it's an honest tension, and I'd rather name it than pretend the ending is airtight. What I'll say in its defence is that the show spent 3 seasons insisting there had to be another way, and then rather than blinking, it went and invented one. That's at least consistent. Aang held the line, and the story bent itself to let him. Whether that's a cop-out or a reward depends entirely on how much you wanted him to have to compromise, and I don't think there's a clean answer. Either way, that's Aang. The boy who inherited a war he was philosophically forbidden to win, and who spent the whole thing looking for the door in the wall that everyone else insisted wasn't there, and eventually, more or less, found it. The boy who spent the longest chasing Aang, though, ended up being the one who changed the most. So let's go there. There's a line Zuko says late in the show, sort of half to himself, that I think is the key to the entire character. He asks, "Why am I so bad at being good?" And the reason that lands the way it does is that by the time he says it, you've watched him try and fail and try again for 3 seasons. He is not bad at being good because he's evil. He's bad at it because nobody ever taught him what good was. He was taught something else entirely, and he's been trying to unlearn it in real time. The something else is honour. Zuko starts the show obsessed with it, and for a long stretch you assume you know what he means. But his idea of honour at the start is very specific and very sad. To Zuko, honour is a thing his father can give back to him. It's a position, a place at the table. He was banished, humiliated, scarred across half his face by his own father in front of a room full of people, and he has decided the way to fix all of that is to capture the Avatar and hand him over, at which point Ozai will love him again and the honour will be restored. That's the logic he's running on. Honour is something you win back from the person who took it. His uncle spends the whole series trying to tell him that's not what honour is, but Zuko can't hear it, not for a long time, because to hear it would mean admitting that his father is never going to give him the thing he's been chasing, because his father was never the source of it in the first place. What I really respect about Zuko's turn, and I genuinely put it up there as one of the best redemption arcs anyone's written, is how badly he does it. He doesn't smoothly become a good person. He lurches, he gets close, then he panics and grabs for the old life with both hands. The clearest example is in Ba Sing Se, where he and his uncle have been living quietly, running a tea shop, actually building something like a peaceful life, and then he's given a genuine choice between that path and his old one, and he chooses wrong. He betrays his uncle. He picks his father's approval one more time, right when you thought he'd finally learned. And it's devastating, because you saw how far he'd come, and you watch it all fall down in a single scene. But that's exactly why it works. A redemption that happens in a straight line isn't really a redemption. It's just a character walking through a door. What makes Zuko's mean something is that he has to walk through the door, walk back out, hate himself for it, and walk through again. The change costs him. He earns it by getting it wrong first, and when he finally gets it right, he says the thing out loud that the whole show has been circling. That no one can hand you your honour. That it's something you earn for yourself by choosing to do what's right. Which sounds like a fortune cookie when I say it flatly like that. But in the moment, it isn't, because you've watched him spend 2.5 seasons believing the exact opposite with his whole heart. The line only works because of how long he was wrong. There's a smaller beat I love that comes after all this, when Zuko finally goes to find his uncle, again, to apologise. He's braced for fury. He's rehearsed it, he expects to be shouted at, maybe cast off, and he'd probably feel he deserved it. And instead his uncle just weeps and forgives him and says he was never angry, only sad and afraid that Zuko had lost his way. And I think that moment is quietly one of the most important in the series, because it's the show demonstrating the thing Zuko had never been shown before. Love that doesn't have to be earned back. Love that was just waiting for you to come home. He'd spent his whole life thinking affection was a prize you won by being useful enough. And here's someone who'd been giving it to him freely the entire time. Once he crosses over, Zuko doesn't get an easy ride either, which I appreciate. He shows up to join the good guys, and they don't trust him. And fair enough, he did spend a year hunting them. He has to prove it slowly. He helps them fend off a rather terrifying assassin, and that buys him a little credit. He teaches Aang firebending, which he can barely do himself at that point, because his fire had always been fueled by rage, and now that the rage is draining out, he's got to find a cleaner source for it, which is its own neat little metaphor. He becomes, gradually, one of them. Not forgiven all at once, forgiven in installments as he keeps showing up. The other thing worth saying about Zuko is that he's the show's argument that you're not your family. He comes from possibly the worst family in the entire world, a genuine dynasty of tyrants, and the show keeps dangling the idea that he might just be the next one in the line. His sister certainly thinks he's weak for not being. His father certainly raised him to be a smaller version of himself. And Zuko's whole arc is the slow, painful process of deciding that where he came from is not a contract he has to honour. He can be made by those people and still refuse to be them. Which, if you've ever come from a family whose values you had to actively climb out of, is a genuinely comforting thing for a cartoon to insist on. He ends the show as Fire Lord, by the way, the very throne his father sat on, the very seat he was banished from, and he takes it not to continue the empire, but to dismantle it. That's a nice bit of symmetry. The banished prince comes home, not to reclaim the old honour, but to spend the rest of his life earning a new kind. And none of it, not one step of it, happens without the uncle. So we really have to talk about him. If you told me before I watched this show that one of the most beloved characters in modern animation would be a middle-aged man whose defining traits are drinking tea, playing a tile game, and gently declining to do anything dramatic, I'd have been sceptical. And then I met Iroh, and I understood immediately. Iroh is Zuko's uncle, and on paper, he should be a villain. He was a Fire Nation general, a very good one. He earned a fearsome nickname, the Dragon of the West, and he once laid a siege on the great Earth Kingdom city of Ba Sing Se that went on for 600 days. This is not a gentle resume. This is a man who was, for most of his life, a weapon of the same empire the show spends its whole runtime dismantling, and then his son died. That's the hinge. His son Lu Ten was killed during that very siege, and something in Iroh broke, and then slowly reformed into something else. He pulled his armies back. He walked away from the throne he was next in line for, let it pass to his younger brother Ozai without much of a fight. And he went quiet and started paying attention to things he'd never paid attention to before. Tea, patience, the people around him, what it actually costs to conquer a city, measured in the people who don't come home from it. I think that's why his wisdom never feels smug, which is the trap most wise mentor characters fall into. Iroh isn't dispensing serenity from a mountaintop he was born on. He earned every bit of his calm by losing the thing that mattered most to him, and having to figure out how to keep living afterward. When he tells Aang that sometimes life is like a dark tunnel, and you can't always see the light, but if you keep moving you'll reach a better place, he's not reciting it. He walked that tunnel, you can hear it. His whole philosophy, if you had to boil it into one phrase, is about letting go. letting go of the ambition, the grudges, the version of the future you were promised and didn't get, and crucially, letting go of the idea that any one nation, including his own, has the whole truth. There's a beautiful thing he does where he encourages Zuko to learn from all four elements, not just fire. Learn water's adaptability, earth's endurance, air's freedom. It's a genuinely radical thing for a Fire Nation general to say that his own people's way of doing things is incomplete, that you become whole by borrowing from the people you were raised to look down on. Here's a fun detail I love. For most of the show, Iroh is quietly a member of a secret society called the Order of the White Lotus. It's an ancient organisation that stretches across all four nations, made up of scholars and masters and philosophers, and its whole purpose is that wisdom and beauty and truth belong to everyone, regardless of which nation you were born in, and the way members recognise each other is through that tile game, Pai Sho. So all those scenes early on where Iroh seems to just be a doddery old man fussing over a board game, he's actually signalling to a hidden network of the wisest people alive. It's hiding in plain sight the entire time, and once you know, you can't unsee it. This tea-obsessed old duffer was plugged into the deepest current of wisdom in the world the whole way through. And when it comes time for the White Lotus to act, they do. They march on Ba Sing Se and liberate the city Iroh once failed to take, which is a lovely bit of closure. The general who besieged it in the name of empire comes back decades later to free it in the name of something better. Same city, completely different man. There's a moment near the end where Zuko, trying to do the right thing, suggests that Iroh should be the one to take the throne. He's the rightful heir, he's wise, he's loved, he'd be a good Fire Lord. And Iroh says no. And his reason is perfect. He says that if he took the throne by force after everything, it would just look like one more grab for power in a family absolutely riddled with them. History would remember it as another coup. The only way to actually break the cycle is for the throne to pass cleanly to someone who represents change, and that someone is Zuko. Iroh understood that the most powerful thing he could do was not take the power, which is, when you think about it, the entire opposite of everything his nation taught him, and the clearest sign of how far he'd travelled. He spends his retirement running a tea shop. That's it. That's the ending he wanted. Not a throne, not a legacy carved in stone, just a little place called the Jasmine Dragon, where he makes tea for anyone who wanders in. A man who could have ruled the world, and what he actually wanted, once he'd let go of everything he was supposed to want, was to make a good cup of jasmine tea for a stranger and watch them enjoy it. I find that genuinely one of the most peaceful character endings I know. Since Iroh's whole thing is balance, it feels right to move to the person who spent the series holding the group's emotional balance together, often at her own expense. Katara. There's an episode where the group is stranded in the desert. Their bison's been stolen, so Aang's shut down with grief and rage and no use to anyone. Toph can't bend properly because it's all loose sand. Sokka has, and I want to be clear, this is canon, drunk cactus juice and is hallucinating. Everyone is falling apart, and Katara just rolls up her sleeves and holds the whole thing together by sheer force of will, keeps them moving, keeps them alive, refuses to let anyone give up. And I always come back to that scene when I think about her, because that is Katara. She's the one who decides over and over that hope is a thing you do rather than a thing you feel. She's the last waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe, which matters. Her people had been hunted, their benders picked off one by one, and by the time we meet her, she's the only one left, self-taught, and later learning her own element off a stolen scroll because there was nobody around to teach her. And the reason there was nobody, the wound underneath everything with Katara, is that the Fire Nation killed her mother when she was small. A raid. A man came looking for the last waterbender in the village, and her mother, Kaya, gave herself up to protect Katara, who was the actual waterbender he was hunting. So Katara doesn't just carry grief, she carries the specific, quiet, corrosive knowledge that her mother died in her place. That's why she becomes the mother of the group so young. She takes on the caretaking, the cooking, the emotional management, the being the grown-up, long before she should have had to. And the show is honest about the cost of that, which I appreciate. Katara is not a saint. She can be self-righteous. She's got a temper. She's quick to judge, quick to correct people, occasionally a bit domineering about it. The show lets her be a real person, with real edges, rather than just a warm hearth for everyone else to gather around, and it's better for it. Now, the thing I really want to sit with, because it's the sharpest moral moment in the whole series, and it's built around her, is an episode late in the 3rd season where she goes hunting for the man who killed her mother. She finds out he's still alive, still out there, and something in her just locks. She has to go. Zuko goes with her, partly to help, partly because he's trying to earn her forgiveness for his own past betrayals, which is a nicely tangled motive. And Aang, who is Aang, urges her toward forgiveness. He tells her that revenge won't heal anything, that letting go is the only way through. And then he says the thing that gives the episode its teeth. He compares her to Jet. Jet, who we'll get to, is a character who let his righteous anger at the Fire Nation curdle into something monstrous, who was willing to hurt innocents to get at guilty ones. And Aang looks at Katara, gripped by this need for vengeance, and gently points out that she's starting to sound like him, that she's one bad decision away from becoming the thing she hates. What I find so good about how this plays out is that the show doesn't take the easy road in either direction. Katara goes. She finds the man, and under the full moon, at the height of her power, she nearly kills him. She actually uses a technique on him that she swore she'd never use, seizes control of his body, holds his life in her hands. And then, at the very last second, she can't. She lets him go. Not because he deserves mercy, he doesn't. He's a snivelling coward who never repented, but because she does. Because becoming his executioner would have cost her something she wasn't willing to spend. Here's where I'll be honest though, because a lot of people are, and I think it's a fair fight. The intended message is that forgiveness heals and revenge doesn't. But the episode's a bit slippery about it, because Katara says explicitly that she doesn't forgive the man, she just chooses not to kill him. So the clean moral Aang was pushing doesn't entirely land the way it was aimed. And there's a reading, which I have some sympathy for, that what the episode actually shows is subtler and darker than its stated lesson. That restraint isn't the same as forgiveness, and that walking right up to the edge of killing someone and stopping isn't a triumph so much as a near miss. I don't think that's a flaw exactly. I think the show got hold of something more complicated than the tidy Aesop it thought it was writing, and the mess is more truthful than the tidiness would have been. Either way, Katara ends that episode, still carrying the grief, but no longer carrying the need to turn it into someone else's death, which is not the same as being at peace, but it's a start, and the show lets it be just a start, which is the honest amount. The other person who lost that mother and dealt with it completely differently was her brother. So let's talk about Sokka, the one member of the group who couldn't bend a single thing. Imagine being in a friend group where one person is a reincarnated cosmic messiah who can control all 4 elements. Another can bend an entire ocean, and a third can feel the earth through her feet and reads people's heartbeats like a lie detector. And you've got a boomerang. And some jokes. That's Sokka's whole life, and I think the show does something genuinely lovely with him, because it never once solves that problem by giving him powers. Sokka is a non-bender in a world that runs on bending, and for a while that eats at him. He's the older brother, the oldest boy left in his village, after all the men, including his father, went off to fight the war. So a lot of responsibility landed on him young, the same way it landed on Katara, just pointed in a different direction. He appointed himself protector. He put on the warrior act, and underneath it there's this real ache about not being able to do the thing everyone around him can do, this quiet fear that he's the one who has to be protected rather than the one doing the protecting. What he actually is, of course, is the reason any of them survive. Sokka's the planner. He's the one who looks at a battlefield, or a map, or a problem, and works out the angle nobody else spotted. He's the strategist, the inventor, the one who remembers they need supplies and a way out. The benders win the fights, but Sokka is very often the one who set up the conditions that let them win, and the show is smart enough to let that be its own kind of power. You don't need to shoot fire out of your hands to be indispensable. Sometimes the indispensable person is the one who thought 3 steps ahead. There's a lovely arc in the 3rd season where he seeks out a swordmaster, a man named Piandao, and learns the blade, and it's important that he chooses the sword, because it's the one thing in his world that owes nothing to bending at all. It's just skill, and patience, and craft. He forges his own weapon out of a fallen meteor, which is a great detail, and becomes genuinely formidable, entirely on his own merits. That's the show quietly telling you the thing it thinks about Sokka. He didn't need to be a bender. He needed to find the discipline that was already his. The other side of Sokka, and it's why he's so easy to love, is that he's funny. Deliberately, reliably funny, in a show that could easily have gotten too heavy for its own good. He's the release valve. He's the one making the sarcastic comment when the mysticism gets a bit thick, and I think that's a real service, both to the group and to the audience. Not every character has to be a thesis. Some of them are there to notice out loud that a talking mushroom is weird, and thank goodness for them. But the show also lets him be sad, and one of the quietest gut punches in the whole series is a moment where he admits to Toph that he can barely remember his mother's face anymore. That's such a specific, true kind of grief. Not the sharp loss, but the slow one. The way the people you lost start to blur no matter how hard you hold on. He processes his mother's death completely differently from Katara. No hunt, no vengeance, just this soft private erosion he mostly keeps to himself, while he keeps everyone laughing. 2 siblings, the same wound, 2 completely different shapes of carrying it. His love life is its own small tragedy, which we'll touch when we get to Yue, so I'll leave that thread for now. But the through line of Sokka, the thing the show keeps arguing through him, is that you do not have to be extraordinary in the way everyone else is extraordinary in order to matter. You can be the ordinary one, the one without the gift, and still be the person the extraordinary ones can't do without. Which is, frankly, most of us. Most of us aren't the chosen one. Most of us are Sokka, figuring out what we're actually good at, and quietly becoming the person who holds the plan together. I find that a rather kind thing for a show to say. The person who arrived and completely upended what a body could do, though, was the one who joined them next. Toph. Toph is blind, and Toph is the greatest earthbender alive. And here's the thing that took me an embarrassingly long time to properly appreciate. Those aren't 2 facts about her. They're one fact. She isn't a great earthbender despite being blind. She's a great earthbender because of it. Let me explain how that works, because it's genuinely one of my favourite bits of world building in the show. Toph was born blind into a fantastically wealthy family. The Beifongs, who took one look at their tiny, sightless daughter and decided she was fragile, helpless, something to be hidden away and protected and never, ever allowed to do anything. Her parents, Lau and Poppy, loved her. I don't doubt it, but they loved her into a very small box. Servants waiting on her, tutors teaching her the most basic breathing forms, and nothing more. The whole world arranged so she'd never have to reach for anything and never get the chance to. And then she found the badger moles. These enormous earth-bending creatures who live underground and who are, themselves, blind. They don't need eyes. They navigate the world by feeling it, sensing every vibration through the earth. And they earthbend not as a technique, but as a way of perceiving. And Toph, a little blind girl, who everyone had written off, learned from them. She learned to feel the ground through the soles of her feet, to read the tiny tremors of everything moving on it. And in doing so, she gave herself a sense richer than sight. She can feel where you are, how you're standing, whether your heart is racing. She built a way of seeing the world that most sighted people will never have, out of the exact thing everyone else treated as her weakness. So when she runs away from that gilded cage to teach the Avatar earthbending, she arrives as possibly the most confident person in the entire show, and that confidence is the point. Toph spent her whole childhood being told what she couldn't do, and her entire personality is a middle finger to that. She's brash, she's rude, she's a bit of a bully honestly, she'll wind Sokka up mercilessly, and it's all coming from the same well. She refuses, on principle, to be pitied. She would rather you underestimate her and then get humiliated than have you treat her gently. There's a whole running thing where she deliberately plays up the helpless blind girl act to con people, then flattens them, and she enjoys it enormously. Her big invention, and this is a proper landmark in the world of the show, is metal bending. Earthbending metal was considered flatly impossible because metal is refined. It's had the earth purified out of it. Except Toph, trapped in a metal cage, sensed that the purification was never total. There were still tiny impurities in there, trace bits of earth clinging on, and she reached for those and bent the metal by bending the earth still hidden inside it. She's 12 years old at this point, by the way, doing something the greatest earthbenders in history had declared undoable, and she does it out of sheer bloody-minded refusal to stay in a box. Again, always the box. Toph's whole life is getting out of boxes people put her in, and metal bending is just the most literal one. I love that she doesn't fully escape her own contradictions, though. There's a lovely bit where, years later, she's set up her own school teaching metal bending, and she realises she started doing to her students the thing her parents did to her, pushing them toward the shape she wants, rather than seeing who they actually are. And she has to catch herself, which is a nice, honest touch, the idea that the person who most resented being controlled can turn around and do a version of it without noticing. The people who get hurt young don't come out saints. They come out with the same fingerprints, just aimed differently, and they have to keep watching themselves. The one soft spot the show gives her, under all the swagger, is that she is still a kid, and every so often it lets that show. There's a moment where, despite everything, despite proving herself 1,000 times over, all she wanted was for her parents to see her as she actually is rather than as the fragile thing they imagined. And they couldn't. They doubled down on protecting her instead. And you get this glimpse of the vulnerable child underneath the world's toughest 12-year-old. And it's handled with a really light touch. No wallowing, just there and then gone. Which is somehow more affecting than if they dwelt on it. That's Toph, the girl who took the thing everyone called her limitation and turned it into a way of perceiving the world nobody else had. Which is about the most hopeful argument you can make about a limitation, really. Sometimes it's not the thing holding you back. Sometimes it's the door. Now, from a character who was underestimated into greatness, let's go to her exact opposite. The one who was told from birth that she was perfect and was destroyed by it. Azula. The last time we really see Azula, she's alone. She's about to be crowned the thing she's wanted her whole life. And instead of triumph, she's unravelling. She's hallucinating her own mother. She's banishing people who aren't there, screaming, "You're all banished," at empty air, cutting her own hair, sobbing on the floor. It is one of the most genuinely disturbing things the show ever does. And it's disturbing precisely because you understand, by that point, exactly how she got there. Azula isn't a monster who finally got what was coming. She's a child who was built into a weapon and then broke, the way weapons do when you use them hard enough. Let me back up, because to get her, you have to compare her to her brother, and the show wants you to. Azula and Zuko are the two children of the same terrible family, raised in the same palace by the same tyrant, and they came out as near-perfect opposites. And the reason the show is very clear about this is love, or the specific absence of it. Their mother Ursa loved Zuko. She saw his gentleness, his empathy, and she nurtured it. Azula, she found harder to love, and Azula knew it. There's a chilling little detail that Ursa showed Azula more fear than affection because she could see what her daughter was becoming, and she was frightened of it. But rather than being the thing that pulled Azula back from the edge, Ursa's fear just confirmed to Azula that softness was for other people. Meanwhile, their father, Ozai, adored Azula. She was a fire-bending prodigy, blue flames, lightning, talents that came to her frighteningly early, and Ozai poured his approval into her the way he poured his contempt into Zuko. He literally scarred and banished the son for showing weakness, and praised the daughter for showing none. So the two kids each got one parent's version of love, and it shaped them completely. Zuko got Ursa's, which was warm and about who you are. Azula got Ozai's, which was cold and about what you can do. And Ozai's love came with a lethal condition attached. It was only ever available for being perfect, being useful, being feared. The moment you stopped delivering, it would be withdrawn. This is why Azula rules the way she rules, which is entirely through fear. It's the only tool she was ever given. She learned it directly from her father. This idea that you control people by making them terrified of you, and she's extraordinarily good at it. But here's the trap, and the show sets it beautifully. Fear isn't loyalty. People you frightened into obeying you don't actually love you. And some part of Azula, underneath the perfect, controlled surface, knows this. There's a bottomless insecurity down there, a terror of abandonment, and she's papered over it with control her whole life. And that's what finally breaks her. Not defeat in battle. Betrayal by the only two people she thought were hers. Her friends Mai and Ty Lee, who we'll talk about properly in a minute, turn on her, because it turns out that if you rule your friendships by fear, there's always going to be a moment where someone fears something more than they fear you, or loves something more, and the whole structure comes down at once. When Mai and Ty Lee choose against her, the lie Azula built her entire self on cracks, and once it cracks, everything behind it comes flooding out. The paranoia, the isolation, the fear she'd been outrunning since childhood. She starts seeing enemies everywhere, because in a sense, she'd made everyone an enemy. That's what fear does. It's lonely all the way down. The line that gets me most is one she says to her father near the end, when she senses him pulling his favour away, redirecting his plans somewhere that doesn't include her. She says, "You can't treat me like this. You can't treat me like Zuko." And it's devastating, because in that one sentence, you see the whole thing. She watched her father destroy her brother. She spent her entire life making sure she'd never be on the receiving end of that. She became perfect specifically, so it could never happen to her. And in that moment, she realizes it's happening anyway, that the conditional love was always going to run out eventually, that no amount of perfection was ever going to be enough to keep it. She was just as much Ozai's victim as Zuko was. She just didn't get the second parent, or the wise uncle, or the friends who stuck around. And so she never got the exit Zuko got. The show is careful, and I think rightly, not to fully let her off the hook. She does genuinely terrible things, entirely of her own volition, and treating her as purely a victim would flatten her into something less interesting than she is. But it keeps both of those true at the same time, which is a genuinely hard thing to pull off. She's a real villain and a real tragedy in the same body at once. She's what Zuko could have been if no one had ever shown him love that didn't have to be earned. She's the dark mirror, the road not taken, the answer to the question the show keeps asking about him, which is, what actually saved you? And the answer, looking at his sister, is that people did, and nobody did it for her. Which brings us, unavoidably, to the man who made them both. Ozai. Here's a choice the show makes about Ozai that I think is really deliberate and really interesting. And it's the choice to make him ultimately not very grand at all. Ozai is the Fire Lord. He's the big bad, the man at the top of the whole war, the source of most of the pain we've been walking through, and for most of the series, he's kept mostly in shadow. Half his face lit, talked about more than seen. His children are terrified of him. His nation trembles before him, and he eventually decides that being Fire Lord isn't enough and crowns himself Phoenix King, which is exactly the sort of thing a man like this does. He wants to burn the entire Earth Kingdom to ash, not for any strategic reason really, just to remake the world with himself, unquestionably, on top of it. That's the whole of his philosophy, if you can even call it that. Power for its own sake. Domination as the only value. And what the show understands about that kind of man, the thing it puts on screen so plainly, you could almost miss it, is that there's nothing underneath. Ozai has no inner life the show's interested in, no tragic backstory it wants to redeem, no complexity it asks you to sit with. Compare that to Zuko, or even Azula, both of whom get whole aching arcs about who they are and why. Ozai gets none of that. And it's not a failure of writing, it's the point. A person who has organised their entire self around dominating others has hollowed themselves out in the process. There's no they're there. The pursuit of pure power is, in the end, a kind of emptiness, and the show refuses to dignify it with the depth it withholds, which is why the ending it gives him is so pointed and so divisive. When Aang finally beats him, he doesn't kill him. He takes his firebending away, strips the power out of him entirely. And what's left, once the fire's gone, is just a man. An ordinary, defeated, rather pathetic man in a cell, with none of the terror left, because the terror was never really him, it was just the power he held. Take that away, and there's almost nothing to be afraid of. The Phoenix King becomes a sad old prisoner in the space of a single scene. Now I'll be straight with you. This is the bit some people find unsatisfying, and I understand why. There's an argument that the show spent 3 seasons building Ozai into this looming existential threat, and then the actual final confrontation and Ozai's actual defeat gets a little undercut. He's beaten, and then he's sort of a punchline, deflated, and if you wanted the villain to feel weighty right to the last frame, that's a letdown. I go back and forth on it. But I think the deflation is doing something on purpose. It's the show's final statement on what he always was, that the fearsome tyrant was, underneath, just a frightened, greedy man who'd found a big enough weapon. Take the weapon away, and there's not much left worth fearing, which might be the most contemptuous thing the story could possibly do to him. Not make him a tragedy, just make him small. Enough about the man, though. He's not worth more than that. Let's go back to the people who orbited his daughter, because 2 of them made a choice at the end that I think is quietly one of the bravest things in the show. There's a moment at a prison called the Boiling Rock where Mai, who has spent the whole show as Azula's cool, bored, knife-throwing companion, does something that should by rights get her killed. She turns on Azula, openly, to save Zuko, who she loves. And Azula, stunned, asks how she dares, points out that Mai must know the consequences. And Mai says the line that defines her, more or less, that she loves Zuko more than she fears Azula. I think about that line a lot because it's the show handing you the entire theme of the Fire Nation in one sentence. This whole nation, this whole family, runs on fear as the organizing principle. Ozai rules by it, Azula copies it, everyone underneath just tries to survive it. And Mai, this flat-affect, deadpan girl who seemed like she didn't care about anything, quietly demonstrates the one thing that actually breaks fear's grip. You can care about something more than you're afraid. That's the whole trick. Fear only works until you love something enough to risk it, and then it stops working completely. Mai's an interesting one, because her defining trait is that she seems to feel nothing, and it turns out that's a survival strategy rather than a personality. She was raised in a stifling, appearance-obsessed household where she was taught to keep everything down, express nothing, cause no trouble. So the boredom, the flatness, it's armour. And the show lets her crack it just once, at exactly the right moment, for exactly the right reason. And it means so much more coming from her than it would from a warmer character. The girl who never chose anything chose Zuko, out loud, in front of the person most likely to kill her for it. Ty Lee is the other half of that betrayal, and she's fascinating in a different way. On the surface, she's the bubbly, acrobatic, endlessly cheerful one, and her special skill is genuinely one of the best ideas in the show. She's a chai blocker. She can jab you in the right places and switch your bending off entirely. Temporarily paralyze you, no bending required. Which makes this cartwheeling circus girl one of the most dangerous people in any fight, because she's the great equalizer, the one who can walk up to the most powerful bender alive and just turn them off. I love that the show's answer to overwhelming power isn't more power. It's a smiling gymnast who knows exactly where to poke. But the thing about Ty Lee is that Azula didn't recruit her so much as pressure her. Ty Lee had actually left that whole world behind to join a circus, to do the thing she loved, and Azula turned up and essentially forced her back into service, made it clear that no wasn't really on offer. So Ty Lee spent that whole stretch performing loyalty to someone who'd strong-armed her into it. And when the moment came, at the Boiling Rock, she chose Mai. Chose her friend over the person who scared them both. She took Azula down to protect Mai, and that's the crack that starts Azula's whole collapse. Two frightened girls at the exact same moment, deciding they were done being ruled by fear, the most powerful person they knew, brought low not by a stronger fighter, but by the simple fact that the people around her finally cared about something more than they dreaded her. And then there's Ursa, the mother, who I want to mention even though she's mostly a ghost in the original series, because she's the source of so much of this. Ursa is the one who loved Zuko's gentleness and feared Azula's coldness. She's the one who was forced out of the family, gone before the show even starts, leaving a Zuko-shaped ache and an Azula-shaped wound. And there's a real tragedy in her, because she did love her children, or tried to, but she couldn't save either of them from the household she was trapped in. She got taken away, and the kids were left alone with Ozai, and you can draw a straight line from her absence to almost everything that goes wrong with both of them. Zuko spends years not knowing if she's alive. Azula, in her final breakdown, hallucinates her, which tells you how deep that particular hole went. The one thing Azula wanted, underneath all the perfection, was her mother to have loved her the easy way. The way she loved Zuko, and she never got it, and it's the thing that finally undoes her. The three of them together are the show's argument that fear can run a nation and a family for a while, but it can't hold. Love, or even just the refusal to be ruled, keeps leaking through the cracks. Mai chose. Ty Lee chose. Ursa, in her way, chose. And every one of those choices cost something and was worth it. From the people who chose their own hearts. Inside the Fire Nation, let's step over to someone who never needed to bend at all to be one of the most capable people in the show. Suki. Suki turns up early, wearing the green robes and the white face paint of the Kyoshi warriors. And the first thing she does, of any real significance, is put Sokka flat on his back. Repeatedly. And I bring that up not for the comedy, though it is funny, but because it's the neat little heart of what she's about. When Sokka first meets her, he assumes, in the way a certain kind of teenage boy does, that the warriors can't be all that because they're girls. And Suki, without much fuss, corrects him. She hands him a training thrashing, and then, crucially, she doesn't rub it in. She just lets him sit with the fact that he was wrong, and when he swallows his pride and asks her to teach him, she does. That whole small arc, Sokka learning to respect a warrior who happens to be a girl, is one of the more quietly grown-up things the show does with him. And it's Suki who occasions it just by being unmistakably excellent at her job. The Kyoshi warriors are worth a word on their own, because they're a lovely idea. They're a group of women who fight in honour of a past avatar, Kyoshi, who we'll get to later, and their whole style is built around her. Metal fans as weapons, this elegant deflecting, redirecting technique, armour and face paint modelled on the avatar they revere, and not one of them is a bender. They're just extraordinarily skilled, disciplined fighters who decided that devotion and training could make them a match for anyone. Which is, again, the show making its recurring point through yet another body. Power isn't only the flashy stuff. A woman with a fan and enough discipline can hold her own against people throwing fire. And there's real dignity in that. Suki herself becomes, over time, a proper fixture of the group, and Sokka's partner, in the fuller sense. And what I appreciate about her, and about how she's written, is that she's steady. She's not a bundle of neuroses, like half the cast. She's competent, she's warm, she knows who she is, and she gives Sokka something none of his own anxieties could, which is someone who sees him clearly and thinks he's plenty. After all his fretting about not being a bender, about not being enough of a warrior, he ends up with a woman who is a fearsome warrior and non-bender herself, and who never once treats his lack of bending as a lack of anything. Two people who found their strength off the beaten path, recognising it in each other. She's not a philosophical thesis the way some of the others are, and that's fine. Not everyone needs to be. Suki's more like a steady demonstration of the things Sokka spends whole episodes agonising over, except she never agonises about it at all. She just quietly is what he's afraid he can't be, and gives him the one gift none of his own worrying could, which is someone who looks at him clearly and thinks he's plenty exactly as he is. Now, from a warrior whose answer to the war was discipline, let's go to someone whose answer was something much darker and much angrier. Jet. Jet is the character the show uses to ask a question it never quite answers, and I mean that as a compliment. The question is roughly this: if your enemy is doing something genuinely monstrous, how far are you allowed to go to stop them? Is there a line? And if there is, what happens to you when you cross it? When we first meet Jet, he's honestly pretty magnetic. He's a teenage rebel leading a band of orphans called the Freedom Fighters, all of them kids who lost families to the Fire Nation, living up in the trees, harassing Fire Nation troops. Katara's a bit taken with him at first, and you get it. He's charismatic, he's got a cause, he's fighting the same empire the heroes are fighting. On paper, he's on the right side. His anger is completely justified. The Fire Nation did take everything from him. That part is real, and the show never pretends otherwise. The problem is what he's willing to do with that anger. Jet's plan, the one that turns Katara against him, is to flood an entire village to wipe out the Fire Nation soldiers stationed there, which sounds like a military strike until you remember that the village is full of ordinary people, Earth Kingdom civilians, his own side technically, and Jet has decided that their deaths are an acceptable price for killing the soldiers, that the cause justifies it, that you can't make an omelette and so on, and that's the line. That's the moment he stops being a freedom fighter and becomes something else, something the show is deeply wary of. Because here's the thing Jet embodies, and it's a genuinely uncomfortable idea for a kids' show to put its finger on. When you fight a monster for long enough, and you let your hatred of it justify anything, you can slowly become a version of the thing you're fighting. Jet hates the Fire Nation for killing innocents, and his solution involves killing innocents. He can't see it because he's so certain he's the good guy. And being certain you're the good guy is exactly the state of mind that lets you do monstrous things with a clear conscience. That's the trap. It's not that Jet is evil, it's that his righteousness stopped having a limit. And righteousness without a limit is one of the more dangerous things a person can carry. This is why Aang later invokes Jet's name to Katara when she's out for revenge, as we talked about. Jet is the cautionary tale the whole show keeps in its back pocket. He's what you might become. He's the warning. What makes his story properly tragic, though, is the end of it. Later on, Jet actually tries to change. He's in the city of Ba Sing Se, trying to leave the fighting behind, and he ends up caught by the city's secret police and brainwashed. His mind wiped and rewritten by a sinister organisation we'll come to. And when the group finds him again, he's confused, unsure what's real, fighting through the fog of what was done to him to do the right thing, one last time. And he's mortally wounded for it. There's this awful, ambiguous moment where he's clearly dying and his friends insist unconvincingly that he's going to be fine. And the show just lets it sit there without confirming it, which somehow makes it worse. So Jet doesn't even get a clean redemption. He gets a muddled, half-finished attempt at one, cut short before it can resolve, his own mind not fully his own at the end. And I find that more honest than a tidy arc would have been. Not everyone who goes too far gets the chance to fully come back. Some people are still mid-turn when the story runs out on them. The show lets him be genuinely sympathetic and genuinely wrong, both, and never tells you how to weigh them against each other. It just leaves the question open, the way real questions like this tend to stay open. The person who lived that same logic all the way to its bitter end, with no ambiguity and no interruption, was an old woman the group meets one full moon night. Harma. The episode with Harma is one of the darker things the show ever did, and it aired on a children's network, which I still find slightly amazing. It's basically a horror episode, and at the centre of it is an old woman who is, when you trace it all the way back, a victim. That's the part that stays with me. Harma did not start as a monster. She was made into one, very deliberately, by exactly the kind of cruelty the show spends its whole run condemning. Here's her story. Harma was a waterbender from Katara's own tribe, the Southern Water Tribe, back before the Benders there were wiped out. And she was captured by the Fire Nation and thrown into a prison built specifically to hold waterbenders, which meant keeping them somewhere with no water to bend. Bone dry, deliberately, so they'd be powerless. Imagine that. Being defined by your connection to an element and then being locked in a place, engineered to sever you from it, for years. It's a very precise kind of torture, and it did to Harma what that kind of thing tends to do. It didn't just imprison her, it changed what she was willing to do to get out. Because Harma, sitting in that dry cell, worked something out. Water isn't only in rivers and rain, it's in living things, it's in blood. And if you're a strong enough waterbender, on a strong enough night, you can reach into a living body and bend the water inside it. Bend the person. She invented a technique out of pure desperation, this ability to seize control of another living creature and move them like a puppet, and she used it to escape. And I want to be fair to her here, because escaping a torture prison by any means necessary is not a crime. That part I'm entirely on her side for. The trouble is what she did after. Harma got out, and she was free, and instead of finding peace, she found revenge. She settled in a Fire Nation town, played the part of a harmless innkeeper for years, and every full moon, when her power was at its height, she'd take control of some innocent townsperson and vanish them away into a cave. Ordinary people. People who'd done nothing to her personally, whose only crime was belonging to the nation that hurt her. She became, in other words, a mirror of her captors. The prisoner became the jailer. The victim built her own dungeon and started filling it, and she couldn't see anything wrong with it, because in her mind the whole nation was guilty, and that was justification enough for anything. And then she meets Katara, and this is where it gets really unsettling. Because Hammer looks at Katara, another Southern Water Tribe waterbender, the first she's seen in decades, and she decides Katara is her heir. Her legacy, she's going to pass the technique on. And when Katara refuses, understandably horrified, Hammer forces her hand. She takes control of Aang and Sokka and turns them into weapons, maneuvers them into a position where the only way Katara can save her friends is to use the very technique she's refusing to learn, to seize control of Hammer's body, to stop her. And Katara does it. She has to. And the episode ends with Katara sobbing in the moonlight, because she's just done the thing she swore she'd never do. And Hammer, being dragged away, is delighted. She got what she wanted. She made another one. There's a line of Hammer's that I keep coming back to, where she tells Katara that the choice isn't really hers, that the power exists, and it's her duty to use the gifts she's been given to win the war. And what's chilling about it is how reasonable it sounds if you don't look too closely. It's the exact logic that turns a victim into a perpetrator. The war did this to me, so the war entitles me to do anything. And Katara hears an echo of that later, when she's out for her own revenge, which is the show quietly threading Hammer through the rest of the season. The old woman is a warning too, same as Jet. This is what unhealed grief can build if you let it. Not justice, just a new cage with you holding the keys this time. From a character undone by the moon's power, let's go to the moon itself, and the girl who gave her life to become it. Yue. At the very top of the world, in the Northern Water Tribe, there's a quiet place called the Spirit Oasis. It's warm, even up there in all that ice, and there's a little pond, and in the pond, 2 koi fish circle each other endlessly. One white, one black. They're the physical forms of the moon and ocean spirits, the 2 forces that give waterbending its power in the first place. It's a peaceful spot, easy to walk past, and it's where the saddest thing in the first season happens. Yue is the princess of the Northern Tribe, and she's lovely, and Sokka falls for her more or less on sight, which for once isn't played entirely for laughs. The trouble is, she's promised to someone else, an arranged engagement meant to strengthen the tribe, so the 2 of them have this gentle doomed thing going where they clearly care for each other and clearly can't act on it, which would be sad enough on its own. But Yue's story has a deeper layer under it, and it's the kind of detail the show drops quietly and lets you find. When Yue was born, she was dying, a sick infant, fading, and none of the tribe's healers could do anything. So her father, desperate, brought her to that oasis and laid her in the pond and prayed to the moon spirit to save her. And it did. The moon gave part of its own life to the dying baby, and she lived, and that's why her hair is white. She's carrying a piece of the moon in her from the very start. Her life was, in a real sense, always partly borrowed, given to her by something that could, if it ever needed to, ask for it back. And then during a great battle, it does. A Fire Nation admiral, a genuinely vile piece of work called Zhao, does something almost unthinkable. He hunts down the moon spirit in its koi form and kills it, just murders the moon. And the instant he does, the colour drains out of the world, and every waterbender everywhere loses their power, because the moon is where waterbending comes from. The whole tribe, defenceless, in the middle of a siege, plunged into this ghastly grey. It's a genuinely eerie sequence, and Yue knows what she has to do. She remembers, or she understands, that the moon gave her its life once, and now the moon is gone, and only she is carrying that borrowed piece of it. So she gives it back. She walks to the pond and she lays her hands on the dead spirit, and she returns the life she was loaned, all of it, which means her own. She dies so the moon can live again, and in doing so, she doesn't just die, she becomes the new moon spirit, rises up into the sky as the thing that gave her her life in the first place. The colour comes back into the world, the waterbenders get their power back, and Sokka, who couldn't save her, has to just watch the girl he loved become the moon. I find it genuinely beautiful, and not in a way that feels cheap, because the show set it up so carefully. Yue's sacrifice isn't a bolt from the blue. It's the completion of something that was true about her from the moment she was born. Her life was a gift from the moon, and she gives it back to the moon when the moon needs it. And there's a rightness to that circle that makes the grief bearable. It's the show's version of an argument about duty, I think, about what you owe to the thing that gave you your life, whether that's a spirit or a family or a people. You never really debates it. She just knows, the way you know a true thing, that the life was never entirely hers to keep. And when the moment comes, she gives it up without much fuss at all. It's also, quietly, the thing that shapes Sokka for a long while after. He loved someone and lost her in about the most final way imaginable, watched her ascend into the night sky, and it takes him a good while to let anyone in again. When he eventually does with Suki, you get the sense he's still carrying Yue up there somewhere, and I like that the show never makes him choose between the memory and the new love. He just gets to hold both. She's up there every night after all. Hard to fully let go of someone who becomes the moon. Now from these very human, very individual stories, I want to step up a level into the stranger, more spiritual machinery underneath all of it. And a good place to start is with a strange old man on a mountaintop who tried to teach Aang to let go, and a bowl of the worst sounding drink in the entire series. The drink, for the record, is a concoction of onion and banana juice, and Guru Pathik makes Aang drink it, and Aang's reaction is roughly the reaction you'd expect. It's a genuinely funny little beat in the middle of what is otherwise one of the most sincerely spiritual episodes of the show, and I love that the writers put it there. They understood that you can teach a real lesson about the nature of the self, and also have a 12-year-old gag about disgusting juice, and that the gag doesn't undercut the lesson, it makes it bearable. That's a very Avatar move. Pathik is an old guru who lives up in the mountains at one of the abandoned air temples, and he was, it turns out, a spiritual brother to the air nomads, and a friend of Aang's old guardian. And he offers to teach Aang to control the Avatar state, that overwhelming power we touched on earlier. But the way he goes about it is the interesting part. He does teach Aang a technique. He tells him that to master the state, Aang first has to master himself, that you cannot bring balance to the world until you've brought balance to your own insides, which is a lovely inversion of how these things usually go. The power isn't out there to be seized. It's in here, waiting behind a set of locked doors, and the only way through is to deal with your own stuff. The doors, in this case, are the chakras. Pathik walks Aang through them one at a time, 7 energy centres running up through the body, each one blocked by a particular fear, or grief, or attachment. He uses this image of a stream clogged with pools of water, and to let the energy flow, you have to clear each clog in turn. And it's not abstract. Each chakra makes Aang confront something real. His guilt about his people, his grief, his fears, and one by one he works through them, which is genuinely moving to watch. This kid sitting on a mountain, forcing himself to look at the worst things he carries. And then he hits the last one, and the last chakra is about pure cosmic energy, blocked by earthly attachment, and to open it, Pathik tells him he has to let go of the person he's most attached to, which for Aang is Katara. And Aang, right in the middle of this profound spiritual breakthrough, gets a vision of Katara in danger, and he stops. He will not let her go. He chooses her over the cosmic power, exactly as we talked about at the start, and in choosing her, he locks the chakra shut. Pathik warns him. He tells him plainly that if he leaves now, he won't be able to enter the Avatar state at all, and Aang leaves anyway. I think this scene is the philosophical heart of the whole first arc, and here's why. The show sets up a genuine conflict between two goods. On one hand, there's enlightenment, detachment, the release from earthly ties that most spiritual traditions hold up as the highest thing. On the other hand, there's love, specific, messy, attached love for one particular person. And the guru's teaching says you have to choose the first, and Aang chooses the second. And the show does not treat that as simply a failure. It's a cost, yes. It genuinely locks away his power for a while. But it's also the most Aang thing he could possibly do, and it's consistent with everything the show believes about him. He's the character who refuses to trade a person he loves for power over and over, and here it is in its purest form. Would you give up the one you love to become perfectly balanced and powerful? And Aang says no. And the show, I think, quietly agrees with him, even while making him pay for it. There's something in there about how the tidy spiritual answer isn't always the human one. Detachment sounds wise on a mountaintop, but a kid who won't abandon the person he loves, even for cosmic power, even when a wise old man tells him to, isn't obviously wrong. He's just choosing a different thing to hold sacred, and the show lets both of those be real without forcing a winner, which is exactly the sort of thing it does best. Speaking of avatars who couldn't quite bring themselves to let go of a particular person and paid a terrible price for it, let's go back in time to the avatar before Aang and the friend who ruined everything. Roku, two boys, best friends, practicing firebending together in the sun. That's how this one starts, and it's important that it starts sweetly because of where it goes. One of the boys is Roku, who will grow up to discover he's the avatar. The other is Sozin, who will grow up to be the Fire Lord, who starts the 100-Year War and orders the genocide of the air nomads. And the whole tragedy of it is that they loved each other first. Roku is the avatar directly before Aang, and he's the one who guides Aang from beyond death, appears to him in visions, offers counsel, and his counsel is shaped entirely by the great mistake of his own life, which is worth understanding, because it's a mistake made out of love, which are always the hardest ones to judge. When they were young, Roku and Sozin were as close as two people can be, and then Roku became the avatar and travelled the world and grew, while Sozin became Fire Lord and grew in a different direction, toward the idea that the Fire Nation was so prosperous, so advanced, that it had a duty to share its greatness with the rest of the world. By force. By colonizing everyone else for their own good, which is the oldest and ugliest justification empires ever reach for. And Roku, when he found out what his old friend was planning, confronted him. There was a fight, and Roku won it decisively, levelled Sozin's throne room, and stood over his oldest friend with the power to end him right there and stop the whole thing before it began. And he didn't, because it was Sozin, because they'd been boys together. Roku warned him, spared him, told him that if he ever overstepped again, there'd be no mercy, and then he walked away and let his friend live. And for 25 years, that seemed to hold. No contact between them, but no war either. And then Roku's home was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. And in his last moments, choking on toxic gas, Roku called out for help, and Sozin left him, flew to his old friend's side. And for a moment it looks like the friendship might mean something after all, like Sozin might save him. And then Sozin has a thought. He realizes that if Roku dies here, there'll be no avatar to stop his plans, because the next avatar will be a helpless newborn somewhere. And so Sozin, looking at his dying best friend, chooses ambition. He leaves Roku to die, turns his back and flies away, and lets the man who once spared his life suffocate in the smoke. That's how the war starts. Not with a battle, with a betrayal of a friendship, twice over. Roku's mercy that spared Sozin, and Sozin's ambition that killed Roku. And the reason Roku's spirit is so insistent with Aang, the reason he pushes Aang toward being willing to do the hard thing with Ozai, is that Roku blames himself for all of it. He believes that if he'd just been decisive, if he'd ended Sozin's threat when he had the chance instead of letting friendship stay his hand, the entire war The whole long stretch of it, all the death, never happens. He tells Aang more or less, don't be like me. Don't let your attachment make you hesitate. Do what I couldn't. Which is fascinating because it sets up this genuine argument between the past avatars and Aang, and the show doesn't resolve it cleanly. Roku says be decisive, and he learned the hard way that showing mercy to Fire Lord Sozin was a mistake. And Aang, in the end, refuses that advice and finds his third way, with the energy bending, as we covered. So you've got two avatars with directly opposing philosophies about mercy, both speaking from hard-won experience, and the show lets Aang choose neither exactly and split the difference. It respects Roku's regret as real and earned, and it lets Aang decline to inherit it anyway. There's one more thing Aang takes from Roku's story though, and it's maybe the gentler lesson. He looks at these two men, Roku and Sozin, both Fire Nation, both proud, one who became a source of wisdom and one who became a monster, and he concludes that anyone is capable of great good or great evil, that where you're born doesn't decide what you become, that every person, even the worst, was once a boy practicing firebending in the sun with a friend, and might have gone another way, which is a generous thing to take from a story that ends in genocide. But it's very Aang. He looks at the friendship that burned down the world, and instead of hardening, he decides it means everyone deserves the chance to be given a chance, even Ozai, especially, in a way, Ozai. Now Roku's regret was that he was too merciful. The avatar before him had exactly the opposite reputation. So let's talk about Kyoshi. If Aang is the avatar of mercy and Roku is the avatar who regretted his mercy, then Kyoshi is the avatar who never had the problem in the first place. She's the counterweight, the one who'd have looked at Aang's agonizing over whether to kill the Fire Lord, and I suspect found the whole debate a bit precious. Kyoshi comes a couple of avatars back, and she's become one of the most legendary figures in the whole world of the show, partly because she lived an extraordinarily long time, and partly because she was, by all accounts, absolutely uncompromising. There's a lovely episode where the group arrives at a place called Kyoshi Island, and Aang gets put on trial because centuries earlier a warlord named Chin the Conqueror died in the course of trying to take that land, and the locals have a somewhat murky memory of the Avatar's role in it. And to sort it out, Aang lets Kyoshi's spirit speak through him, and Kyoshi sets the record straight in the most Kyoshi way possible. She essentially takes responsibility for the warlord's death without a shred of remorse. She explains that she did what needed to be done to protect her people, that she created the very island they're standing on by splitting it off from the mainland to keep them safe, and that the warlord's death was, as far as she was concerned, a consequence of his own greed and no fault of hers. There's no hand-wringing, no agonized speech about the sanctity of life. Kyoshi looked at a threat and dealt with it decisively, and lived a very long life, apparently at peace with that. She's the show's argument that sometimes justice is a harder, sharper thing than mercy, and that a certain kind of order only holds when someone is willing to be the sharp edge. Now I want to be a bit careful here, because Kyoshi's exact philosophy gets quoted around a lot, and some of the punchier lines attributed to her come from the wider world of the books rather than the show itself, so I won't put words in her mouth I can't vouch for, but the stance comes through clearly enough in what's on screen. Where Aang recoils from force, Kyoshi reaches for it without much hesitation when she judges it necessary. Where Roku dithered out of friendship and regretted it forever, Kyoshi acted and slept fine. She represents the pole of the argument that the softer avatars keep circling, the idea that peace sometimes has to be enforced, and that being unwilling to ever act decisively is its own kind of moral failure, one that lets warlords and tyrants flourish in the space your gentleness leaves open. What I find genuinely clever is that the show doesn't tell you Kyoshi's right or wrong. It just puts her there, in the lineage, as a real option. When Aang consults his past lives about whether to kill Ozai, Kyoshi is one of the voices, and her answer is exactly what you'd expect. She tells him essentially that she'd have done it without a second thought, that only the willingness to go that far actually brings peace. And Aang hears her and weighs her, and ultimately declines her path too, same as he declines Roku's. But her being there matters. It means Aang's mercy isn't naivety, because he chose it with the full weight of the alternative sitting right in front of him. Kyoshi made the case for the sword, plainly and from experience, and Aang decided against it with his eyes open. That's a much stronger version of pacifism than one that never had to look justice in the face. And there's a nice long echo of her, which we already brushed against. The Kyoshi warriors Suki's order are still out there centuries later, keeping her memory and her decisiveness alive in that fan-fighting discipline. So Kyoshi's philosophy never fully leaves the show. It just gets carried forward in the people who chose to model themselves on her, quietly holding down her corner of the argument long after she's gone. Now, we've talked about a whole line of avatars, each one a different answer to how to hold power justly. But where does the avatar even come from? What is it underneath all the reincarnation? For that, we have to go all the way back to before there were 4 nations at all. A quick note before I get into this one. The origin of the avatar isn't actually told in The Last Airbender itself. It's revealed later in the sequel series that follows the next avatar after Aang, in a long flashback that finally explains where the whole thing came from. But it's such foundational lore about what the avatar even is that I can't really do a video about avatar philosophy and leave it out. So consider this the deep background to everything we've been talking about, filled in from further down the timeline. 10,000 years or so before Aang, there was no avatar. There were no 4 nations. Humans lived huddled on the backs of enormous ancient creatures called lion turtles, the same kind Aang meets at the very end of his own story. And the world was mostly wilderness, ruled by spirits, dangerous for people to walk in at all. And in this era, there lived a man named One. Just a man. A thief, actually. A scrappy nobody trying to survive, which I rather like as a starting point for the most important figure in the world's history. And weaving through all of existence, in this age, were 2 spirits locked in an eternal struggle. Rava, the spirit of light and peace and order, and Vatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. And here's the crucial thing about them, the thing that makes the whole cosmology of this show so quietly sophisticated. Rava and Vatu are not simply good and evil. They're a pair, 2 halves of a necessary whole. Light and dark, order and chaos, and the point was never for one to destroy the other. The point was balance. They'd been fighting forever, and they were meant to keep fighting forever, because a world with only light and no dark, or only order and no chaos, isn't actually a healthy world. It's just a different kind of broken. One gets tangled up in their struggle, and at a rare cosmic event when the spirit world and the physical world align, he makes a choice. To stop Vatu from winning and plunging everything into darkness, he fuses himself with Rava, bonds his human spirit to the spirit of light, permanently. And that fusion, a human being joined with a spirit, capable of channeling immense power, is the very first avatar. That's what the avatar is underneath all of it, a bridge. A human married to a spirit, standing in the gap between the 2 worlds, charged with keeping them in balance. And this is where it gets genuinely lovely, philosophically. One defeats Vatu, locks the darkness away, and restores balance. But he understands, by the end of his life, that he hasn't actually won. He can't win, because darkness isn't a problem you solve once. There's a line in there where one realizes that even with Vatu contained, humanity still carries darkness inside it, that the struggle isn't out there to be finished, it's woven into everything forever. He spends the rest of his life trying to bring peace and mostly failing, and dies grieving that he couldn't fix the world, and rather comforts him with a promise that his spirit, joined with hers, will be reborn again and again, that the work will continue through life after life after life, that he'll keep coming back to hold the balance for as long as the world needs holding. And that's the Avatar cycle. That's Aang and Roku and Kyoshi and everyone before them. All of them are one, reborn, still trying, still failing a bit, still coming back. I think that's a remarkably grown-up idea to build a children's franchise on. Most stories tell you that good defeats evil, and then everyone lives happily ever after. The end. Problem solved. This one tells you that darkness and light are permanent partners, that you don't defeat the dark, you balance it, and that the balancing is a job that never finishes and has to be done again by every generation. It reframes everything we've talked about. Aang isn't trying to win a final victory over the Fire Nation and end all conflict forever. He's just doing his turn, holding the balance for his stretch of time, knowing full well the balance will need holding again, after him, and again after that. Which is, when you sit with it at 1 a.m, a strangely comforting thought. You don't have to fix everything. Nobody fixes everything. You just hold your corner of it steady for your while, and then you hand it on. The light never wins for good, but the dark never wins for good either. It just keeps going, tipping back and forth, held in place by whoever's willing to stand in the middle of it. That's the whole engine of the show, right there at the bottom of everything. Right, that's the cosmology. Let's come back down to earth, quite literally, and talk about some of the wordless companions who carried all of this on their backs, starting with a very large, very fluffy flying bison. Appa is a sky bison, which is to say he's an enormous 6-legged flying creature, roughly the size of a small building, covered in fur with an arrow on his head, and he is 100% a good boy. He's the group's transport, their flying ride from place to place, and it would be easy to file him under set dressing, a way to get the kids from one location to the next. But the show flatly refuses to treat him as furniture. Here's the detail I love. When young airbenders came of age, they'd travel to one of the temples and choose their own sky bison, a lifelong bond, one animal and one person, together for the rest of their days. So Appa isn't Aang's pet. Appa is Aang's oldest friend. The two of them were frozen in that same iceberg together, which means that when Aang wakes up into a world where every single person he knew is dead, Appa is the one living link he has left to the entire vanished world of the air nomads. That's a heavy thing to load onto a big fluffy animal, and yet it works because the show plays it completely straight. There's an episode, and I'm not ashamed to say it gets me, where Appa is stolen and separated from the group, and we follow him. Just him, lost, mistreated, passed from owner to owner, trying to find his way back. No dialogue to speak of, just this animal's grief and confusion and stubborn loyalty, refusing to give up on getting home. It's one of the more emotionally effective things the show ever does, and it does it almost entirely without words, which tells you how much they respected the character. Appa isn't comic relief. He's a person near enough who happens not to talk. Momo is the other one, the little flying lemur, and he's more of a mischief maker, all big ears and quick hands, and a fondness for stealing food. But there's a quiet sadness under Momo too, if you go looking. When Aang finds him, Momo is the last living creature at the Southern Air Temple, the ruin where Aang grew up. So this one small animal is, in a way, the last inhabitant of Aang's entire childhood home. The temple's whole population, down to one lemur. The show doesn't dwell on it, but it's there, and it gives Momo a weight his antics might otherwise not carry. And since we're on the subject of animals who matter more than they first appear, it's worth a quick word about where the bending arts actually come from, because it's not humans who invented them. Every element was originally learned from creatures or spirits. Earthbending came from the badger moles, the blind underground giants we talked about with Toph, who bent the earth as naturally as breathing. Firebending, and this is a gorgeous detail, came originally from dragons. The first firebenders learned from actual dragons, and the true meaning of fire, the show insists, was never destruction, at all but life, warmth, energy, before the Fire Nation twisted it into a weapon. There are two dragons late in the series, Ran and Shor, who test Zuko and Aang and remind them of what fire was supposed to be, and waterbending, as we saw, comes from the push and pull of the moon and ocean themselves. So the whole magic system of the show is, at its root, humans humbly learning from the natural world. Not conquering it, not inventing power out of nothing, but watching a badger mole or a dragon or the tide and going, oh, I could learn something from that. Which fits the show's whole worldview rather beautifully. Even the power to move mountains started with paying close attention to an animal that was better at it than you. There's a humility baked right into the mechanics, and I think that's lovely. From the companions who couldn't speak, let's go to the person who spoke to Aang most, before any of the rest of it began. The monk who raised him, Gyatso. Before any of the war before the ice, Aang was just a boy at the Southern Air Temple, and the person who raised him was a monk named Gyatso. And the first thing you learn about Gyatso in the flashbacks is that he was fun. Genuinely, deliberately fun. There's a memory of the two of them flinging pies at the other monks who are trying, very seriously, to meditate and cackling about it together. Which sounds trivial, and it isn't, because it tells you something the show believes quite deeply. Gyatso understood that joy is not the opposite of spiritual seriousness. That you could be a wise monk, devoted to a life of meditation and discipline and detachment, and also throw pies at your friends and laugh until you couldn't breathe. He didn't see those as being intention. He saw playfulness as part of the practice, a way of staying light, staying open, not letting the weight of the world calcify you. And he passed that on to Aang. So much of what makes Aang Aang, that goofiness, that refusal to harden even under enormous loss, comes from Gyatso. He's the reason Aang stayed a kid at heart through everything. He got the model young. There's a poignant layer to it too, which is that Gyatso was, as far as anyone can tell, protecting Aang even in how he raised him. The other monks wanted to send Aang away for more rigorous training, to separate him from Gyatso, because they worried the bond was making Aang too attached. And it was that pressure, partly, that made Aang run away in the first place, right before the war, which is the thing that led to him being frozen and surviving, while everyone else didn't. So in a roundabout, unintended way, the closeness between them is part of what saved Aang's life. And then there's the hard part, which I'll handle gently because the show does. When Aang returns to the temple, 100 years later, he finds it in ruins, and he finds Gyatso, or what's left of him. A skeleton surrounded by the armour of the many Fire Nation soldiers he took down before he fell. Because Gyatso, this gentle pie-throwing monk, did not go quietly. And it's a genuinely shattering moment. The reveal, the understanding washing over Aang that the man who raised him died fighting, alone, defending a home that was already lost. The show doesn't linger cruelly on it. It shows you enough and then moves you along, which is the right amount. But it's there, the cost underneath all of Aang's lightness. The person who taught him to stay joyful died in the destruction of everything they both loved. And Aang carries that and stays joyful anyway, which might be the truest tribute to Gyatso he could possibly offer. From the man who taught Aang how to be light, let's swing to the philosophy of an entire city that decided the way to stay calm was to never let anyone say a true thing out loud. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. That's the line. It gets repeated in this flat, pleasant, smiling voice by various officials whenever anyone in the Great Earth Kingdom city gets close to mentioning the war that is, of course, raging across the whole world and right up to the city's walls. There is no war in Ba Sing Se, and the more you hear it, the more genuinely unsettling it becomes, because you realize it isn't ignorance, it's policy. The people running the city have decided that the way to keep everyone calm is to make it socially impossible to acknowledge reality. The man running it is Long Feng, and he's a wonderfully creepy sort of villain, precisely because he's so quiet about it. He holds the title of Grand Secretariat, which sounds like a paper-pushing job, and technically, the city has a king. But the king is a figurehead, kept happy and distracted and utterly clueless, and the real power sits with Long Feng and his secret police, a group called the Dai Li. And what the Dai Li do, underneath the polite surface of the most orderly city in the world, is enforce the lie. They monitor, they intimidate, and when someone won't stop talking about the war or learns too much, they take them away and they do something to their mind. Because the Dai Li's specialty, their signature horror, is brainwashing. They have a place beneath the city, a lake, where they take people and rewrite them. Replace what they know with a pleasant, compliant, hollowed-out version. Anyone who becomes a problem simply gets re-educated into someone who isn't. This is what happened to Jet, as we touched on. It's what nearly happens to others. And there are these agents, women called the Judees, who guide visitors around the city with fixed, glassy smiles, and when one Judee is taken away and replaced, the next one has the same name and the same smile, and nobody's supposed to notice. It's deeply sinister in a way the show doesn't often go, this bureaucratic, smiling, total control. And what I find genuinely sharp about it is the philosophy underneath, because Long Feng isn't a warlord. He's not trying to conquer anyone. His whole argument, the thing he actually believes, is that the war would cause panic, and panic would destroy the city. And so the humane thing, the responsible thing, is to keep the population blissfully unaware. Comfort as the highest good. Peace of mind, enforced from above, at the cost of everyone's ability to know what's actually true. And he'd tell you he's the good guy. He'd tell you he's protecting people. That's the trap of it. It's tyranny that genuinely believes it's kindness. The show is making a real point here, and it's a braver one than you'd expect from a kid's cartoon. It's saying that a comfortable lie is its own kind of violence, that keeping people calm by keeping them ignorant isn't peace. It's just a nicer looking cage. The city of Ba Sing Se looks on the surface like the one safe, orderly place in a world on fire. And the show slowly reveals that the safety is a fiction, maintained by erasing people's minds, and that a real war is coming for the city, no matter how many times everyone agrees not to mention it. Reality doesn't care whether you've banned the word for it. It arrives anyway, and when it does, the enforced calm shatters instantly, because it was never actually strength, just denial wearing the costume of strength. There's a lovely irony that Ba Sing Se is also where Iroh runs his tea shop and finds his peace, in the same book in the same city. Two completely different ideas of how to be at rest sitting side by side. Long Feng's peace, which is control and denial and a boot on the truth, and Iroh's peace, which is acceptance and presence and a good cup of tea. Same city, opposite answers, and the show clearly knows which one it prefers. From the city that enforced its calm, let's go to a king who found peace in the exact opposite way, by being completely, gloriously mad. Bumi. King Bumi is, on first meeting, completely unhinged. He's the ancient ruler of the city of Omashu. He's got wild hair and a lopsided face and a cackle, and when Aang arrives, he subjects him to a series of bizarre, seemingly nonsensical challenges instead of just saying hello. He seems senile, he seems dangerous, he seems, frankly, like a problem. And then it turns out that Bumi is one of the sharpest, most powerful, and most patient people in the entire show. And the madness was, at least partly, a test. Here's the lovely reveal. Bumi is Aang's friend. Not a new friend, an old one. From before the ice. The two of them were boys together 100 years ago, and Boomy has simply lived an extraordinarily long time, so that the mad old king turns out to be a living link to Aang's lost world, same as Appa is. And underneath the cackling, Boomy has a philosophy, and he lays it out for Aang directly, and it's genuinely one of the more interesting ideas the show offers. He calls it neutral Jing. Now in this world, when benders fight, they mostly work in two modes. Positive Jing, which is attacking, advancing, taking the initiative, and negative Jing, which is retreating, defending, giving ground. Most fighters live in those two. But Boomy teaches a third thing, neutral Jing, which is the art of doing nothing, of waiting, of listening and watching and staying completely still and patient until exactly the right moment presents itself, and only then acting decisively, all at once. It's the discipline of restraint, the wisdom of not moving. And Boomy doesn't just preach it, he lives it in the most dramatic way possible. When the Fire Nation takes his city, Boomy doesn't fight. He lets himself be captured, sits in a metal box and waits. For ages, everyone assumes he's given up, or gone too mad to resist. And then, at precisely the moment he's been waiting for, when the conditions are exactly right, he explodes out of captivity and single-handedly liberates his entire city in about the time it takes to describe it. He'd been ready the whole time. He was just waiting for his moment, and he had the patience, the neutral Jing, to wait as long as it took. I love this as a counterpoint to almost every other character in the show, because so much of Avatar is about action. Learning to fight, choosing to act, deciding when to use your power. And here's Boomy, quietly insisting that sometimes the most powerful and skillful thing you can do is nothing at all. That patience is a discipline every bit as demanding as any martial art. That the person who can sit still and wait for the right moment while everyone around them panics and rushes is often the one who wins in the end. In a show full of kids learning to move mountains, the mad old king's great lesson is about the strength it takes to hold completely still. He's also, and I don't want to lose this, just a delight. The cackle, the rock candy, the sheer chaotic joy of him. He's proof that being one of the wisest people in the world and being an absolute lunatic are in no way mutually exclusive, which is a combination I have a lot of time for. From the mad genius king, let's widen out one last time, to all the ordinary people who filled the world in around the edges of the big story. One of the things I appreciate most about Avatar, and it's the kind of thing that's easy to take for granted, is how full the world feels around the edges. The main story is enormous, world-ending stakes, cosmic reincarnation, the fate of nations, and yet the show keeps stopping to notice ordinary people living ordinary lives, and it treats them as if they matter, because in the world of the show they do. So before we wind this down, I want to just wander through a few of them, not to do any of them justice really, just because they're part of why the whole thing feels lived in and warm rather than like a backdrop. There's the cabbage merchant, who is basically a running joke, a poor man with a cart full of cabbages that gets destroyed over and over in whatever chaos the heroes happen to be causing that week. "My cabbages," he wails, every single time as his livelihood gets smashed in the crossfire of the Avatar's adventures. And it's funny, but there's also something quietly humane in it. This reminder that when heroes tear through a city having their grand adventure, there's always some ordinary bloke whose cabbages get wrecked and who has to deal with that. The story looks huge from the inside and looks like property damage from the pavement. There are the Ember Island players, who are maybe my favourite of these little diversions. They're a theatre troupe in the Fire Nation, and near the end of the show, the heroes go and watch a play the troupe has put on about the Avatar's own adventures. About them. And it's terrible, gloriously terrible. A cheap, inaccurate, unflattering dramatisation of everything we've watched. With the characters played by wildly wrong actors, and all their flaws exaggerated for cheap laughs. It's the show parodying itself, letting the characters squirm as they watch bad theatre versions of themselves. And it's both very funny and slightly poignant. This idea of seeing your own story told badly by strangers who don't really understand it. There's the Mechanist, an inventor whose cleverness keeps getting turned to war whether he wants it to or not. There's Piandao, the swordmaster who trains soccer, who turns out, in a nice quiet reveal, to be one of those White Lotus members too, part of that hidden network of the wise scattered across the nations. There's June, a bounty hunter with an enormous beast that can track anyone by scent, who's not on anyone's side but her own, and is all the more fun for it. There's the earth-bending wrestler who calls himself the Boulder and refers to himself in the third person. There's a man whose entire contribution is foaming at the mouth in excitement at one point, and who fans have loved ever since precisely because he's so gloriously minor. I could keep going, and the point isn't any one of them. The point is that the show kept bothering. It kept insisting that the world isn't just a stage for the heroes, it's a real place full of real people with their own small concerns, their cabbages and their plays and their grudges and their jobs. And honestly, that's part of why this show works so well, as the sort of thing you put on at the end of a long day. It treats ordinary lives as worth the screen time. And ordinary lives, the ones without a war to win or an element to master, are genuinely restful to think about. Sometimes it's nice to remember that in the middle of all the cosmic drama, someone was just trying to sell cabbages, which feels like a good place to start bringing all of this into land. Before I properly wind down, there are a couple of characters I've skated past that deserve at least a nod, so let me gather them up here. The big one is Zhao, who I mentioned in passing when we talked about Yue, because he's the one who killed the moon. Zhao is a Fire Nation admiral, and he's a very particular kind of villain, the ambitious careerist. He's not a tragic figure like Zuko, and he's not a hollow force of nature like Ozai. He's something more recognisable, and, in a way, more petty. He's a climber. A man consumed by his own ambition, forever scheming for the next promotion, the next glory, the next way to make himself important. His rivalry with Zuko is basically two people fighting over the same prize, except Zhao has none of Zuko's buried decency, just naked hunger for status. And where his ambition takes him is genuinely monstrous. Zhao decides that the way to make himself the greatest figure in Fire Nation history is to do something no one has ever dared, to kill the moon spirit itself and cripple every waterbender in the world in one stroke. And he does it. He actually does it. This act of almost cosmic vandalism, murdering a spirit for personal glory. And it's exactly that hubris that undoes him. He reaches for a power far beyond what any person should touch, purely to feed his own ego, and the ocean itself rises up and takes him for it. There's an old idea in a lot of storytelling that the gods punish mortals who overreach, and Zhao is the show's cleanest version of it. The man who tried to kill the moon to make himself great, dragged down into the sea. Ambition without limit, meeting the limit it refused to believe in. And then there are the genuine odds and ends, the ones I could do whole tangents on another time. There's the whole spirit world, which the show only dips into, but which has its own logic and its own strange inhabitants. A face-stealing spirit, a great forest spirit, all sorts I keep meaning to explore properly. There are various Fire Nation figures. The assassin Combustion Man, who tracks the group with a third eye that fires explosions. The Warden of the Boiling Rock. The many soldiers who are, the show is careful to show, mostly just ordinary people caught up in something bigger than them. There's a whole lineage of past avatars beyond the two we discussed. Each one a life, each one another turn of that endless wheel we talked about. There's one more thing worth saying about all these Fire Nation figures actually, because it's easy to miss how carefully the show handles them. It would have been the simplest thing in the world to make the enemy nation cartoonishly, uniformly evil, a faceless mass of bad guys to be knocked down. And the show pointedly refuses. It keeps stopping to show you Fire Nation civilians who are just people, kids at school, a fishing family, ordinary soldiers who signed up believing the story they'd been told their whole lives about their nation's greatness. There's a whole stretch where Aang and his friends live undercover among ordinary Fire Nation folk and find them, for the most part, perfectly decent. That's a deliberate and rather brave choice. It's the show insisting that even the nation that carried out a genocide is made of individual people, most of them not monsters, most of them just born on the wrong side of a lie they never chose to believe. Which is the same generous idea Aang took from Roku's story. Spread out across a whole population, anyone is capable of great good or great evil, including the people you were raised to hate. I'm not going to do all of them justice tonight, and I don't need to. The point of gathering them up here is just to acknowledge that the world keeps going past the edges of what any one video can hold, which is rather the feeling the show itself leaves you with. There's always another character, another story, another life being lived just off to the side of the main one. It's a full world. That fullness is a lot of why it's such a comforting one to spend time in. Right, let's bring it home. So that's the cast, more or less. And taking them all in at once like this, in one long sitting, I keep coming back to the same thing, which is how much faith the show puts in each of these characters to stand for an idea. Not merely to have a personality, but to hold a genuine position on how a life ought to be lived, and to make the case for it in the way they move through the world. Think about the spread of it. Aang makes the case for mercy, for holding on to your principles even when the whole world is telling you they're a luxury you can't afford. Zuko makes the case that honor isn't something anyone can hand you, that you build it yourself slowly, by choosing right and getting it wrong and choosing right again. Iroh makes the case for letting go, for balance, for the quiet life over the grand one. Katara makes the case for hope as active labour, and for the terrible pull of revenge, and for the hard work of not becoming what hurt you. Sokka makes the case that you don't need to be extraordinary in the obvious way to be the person nobody can do without. Toph makes the case that your greatest limitation might be a door. Azula, heartbreakingly, makes the case for what happens when a child gets only the conditional kind of love. And underneath all of them, one and the whole endless cycle make the deepest case of all, that you don't defeat the darkness. You balance it, and the balancing never ends. And the part that gets me every single time is that the show never crowns any of them right. It doesn't sit you down and rule that Aang's mercy beats Kyoshi's hard justice, or the reverse. It just lays them both in front of you, each carried by someone who paid for it with a whole life, and lets you feel how strange it is that decent, careful people can end up this far apart on the questions that matter most. Roku spent his entire afterlife wishing he'd been harder. Aang looked that regret square in the face and chose gentleness regardless. The show won't tell you which of them had it right, because it doesn't believe that's a question with a clean answer, and I've come to think that's a braver move than the usual one. So much storytelling is quietly in the business of instruction. Pick someone, hand them the correct values, let them win, and the winning proves the values. Avatar mostly walks away from that bargain. What it gives you instead is a whole world of people feeling their way toward an answer, each at their own speed, each botching a fair amount of it along the way, and it flatly declines to line them up and grade them. It just says, here are the questions, here's how a few different people tried to meet them, nobody managed it cleanly, and that's all right. That is more or less what being a person looks like. You take your turn. You hold your stretch of the balance for as long as it's yours to hold, and then you pass it on to whoever's next. 4 nations, 4 elements, 4 temperaments, and running underneath all of it, the show's quiet insistence that a good life doesn't come in a single shape. The air that flows around conflict, the water, that adapts and endures, the earth that stands firm and waits, the fire that drives forward. You need all four. A world of only one would be a broken world. And a person, the show seems to think, is much the same. A bit of each, held in balance, tipping back and forth your whole life. And the work is just keeping it roughly level. Now, I've only really talked about the one series tonight, the original run with Aang. There's a whole second era I've barely touched. The next Avatar after him, Korra and her world, is a completely different set of answers. Different questions even. Whether the world still needs an Avatar at all. What freedom is actually worth. A whole new cast of people making their own arguments with their own lives. And I genuinely love to walk through all of them the same way some other night, if there's an appetite for it. That's a video I've got half planned in my head already. We'll see, but for tonight, this is where I'll leave it. A boy who inherited a war he was never allowed to win, and the sprawling, strange, gentle family that grew up around him, every one of them quietly arguing for a different way to be decent in a world that hands out no instructions. Nobody managing it flawlessly, everybody having a go at the same time. And somehow, that settles into a kinder thought than any neat, single answer ever could. Other people are out there working it out too. All of them are. None of them are finished. And that, I think, is exactly how it's meant to be. Thanks for staying with me through all of it, or for drifting off somewhere in the middle, which is honestly just as good. Either way, I hope it was a nice place to rest your head for a while. Sleep